The Invisible Man, A Grotesque Romance, by H.G. Wells. Chapter 6. The Furniture That Went Mad. Now it happened that in the early hours of Whit Monday, before Milly was hunted out for the day, Mr. Hall and Mrs. Hall both rose and went noiselessly down into the cellar. Their business there was of a private nature, and had something to do with the specific gravity of their beer. They had hardly entered the cellar when Mrs. Hall found she had forgotten to bring down a bottle of sarsaparilla from their joint room. As she was the expert and principal operator in this affair, Hall very properly went upstairs for it. On the landing he was surprised to see that the stranger's door was ajar. He went on into his own room, and found the bottle as he had been directed. But returning with the bottle, he noticed that the bolts of the front door had been shot back, that the door was, in fact, simply on the latch. And with a flash of inspiration he connected this with the stranger's room upstairs and the suggestions of Mr. Teddy Henfrey. He distinctly remembered holding the candle when Mrs. Hall shot these bolts overnight. At the sight he stopped, gaping. Then, with the bottle still in his hands, went upstairs again. He rapped at the stranger's door. There was no answer. He rapped again, then pushed the door wide open and entered. It was as he expected. The bed, the room also, was empty. And with the stranger, even to his heavy intelligence, on the bedroom chair and along the rail of the bed were scattered the garments, the only garments, so far as he knew, and the bandages of their guest. His big slouch hat, even, was cocked jauntily over the bedpost. As Hall stood there, he heard his wife's voice coming out of the depth of the cellar, with that rapid telescoping of syllables and interrogative cocking up of the final words to a high note, by which the West Sussex villager is wont to indicate brisk impatience. "George, you got that wand?" At that he turned and hurried down to her. "Jenny," he said, over the rail of the cellar steps, "'tis the truth, what Henfrey says. He's not in his room, he ain't, and the front door's unbolted." At first Mrs. Hall did not understand, and as soon as she resolved to see the empty room for herself, Hall, still holding the bottle, went first. "If he ain't there," he said, "his clothes are. And what's he doing without his clothes, then? 'Tis a most curious business." As they came up the cellar steps, they both, it was afterwards ascertained, fancied they heard the front door open and shut, but seeing it closed and nothing there, neither said a word to the other about it at the time. Mrs. Hall passed her husband in the passage and ran on the first upstairs. Someone sneezed on the staircase. Hall, following 6 steps behind, thought he had heard her sneeze. She, going on first, was under the impression that Hall was sneezing. She flung open the door and stood regarding the room. "Of all the curious," she said. She heard a sniff close behind her head, as it seemed, and turning, was surprised to see Hall 12 feet off on the topmost stair. But in another moment he was beside her. She bent forward and put her hand on the pillow, and then under the clothes. "Cold," she said. "He's been up this hour more." As she did so, a most extraordinary thing happened. The bedclothes gathered themselves together, leapt up suddenly into a sort of peak, and then jumped headlong over the bottom rail. It was exactly as if a hand had clutched them in the center and flung them aside. Immediately after, the stranger's hat hopped off the bedpost, described a whirling flight in the air through the better part of a circle, and then dashed straight at Mrs. Hall's face. Then as swiftly came the sponge from the washstand, and then the chair, flinging the stranger's coat and trousers carelessly aside, and laughing dryly in a voice singularly like the stranger's, turned itself up with its 4 legs at Mrs. Hall, seemed to take aim at her for a moment, and charged at her. She screamed and turned, and then the chair legs came gently but firmly against her back and impelled her and Hall out of the room. The door slammed violently and was locked. The chair and the bed seemed to be executing a dance of triumph for a moment, and then abruptly everything was still. Mrs. Hall was left almost in a fainting condition in Mr. Hall's arms on the landing. It was with the greatest difficulty that Mr. Hall and Milly, who had been roused by her scream of alarm, succeeded in getting her downstairs, and applying the restoratives customary in such cases. "'Tis spirits," said Mrs. Hall. "I know 'tis spirits. I've read in papers of 'em, tables and chairs leaping and dancing." "Take a drop more, Janny," said Hall. "'Twill steady ye." "Knock him out," said Mrs. Hall. "Don't let him come in again. I half guessed, I might 'a' known, with them goggling eyes and bandaged head and never going to church of a Sunday. And all them bottles, more'n it's right for anyone to have. He's put the spirits into the furniture. My good old furniture. 'Twas in that very chair my poor dear mother used to sit when I was a little girl. To think it should rise up against me now." "Just a drop more, Janny," said Hall. "Your nerves is all upset." They sent Millie across the street to the golden 5 o'clock sunshine to rouse Mr. Sandy Wadgers, the blacksmith. Mr. Hall's compliments and the furniture upstairs was behaving most extraordinary. Would Mr. Wadgers come around? He was a knowing man, was Mr. Wadgers, and was very resourceful. He took quite a grave view of the case. "I'm darned if that ain't witchcraft," was the view of Mr. Sandy Wadgers. "You aren't horseshoes for such gentry as he." He came round greatly concerned. They wanted him to lead the way upstairs to the room, but he didn't seem to be in any hurry. Over the way, Hucksters and Prentice came out and began taking down the shutters of the tobacco window. He was called over to join the discussion. Mr. Huckster naturally followed over in the course of a few moments. The Anglo-Saxon genius for parliamentary government asserted itself. There was a great deal of talk and no decisive action. "Let's have the facts first," insisted Sandy Wadgers. "Let's be sure we be acting perfectly right and bustin' that there door open. A door on bust is always open to bustin', but you can't unbust a door once you busted it." And suddenly and most wonderfully the door of the room upstairs opened of its own accord, and as they looked up in amazement, they saw descending the stairs the muffled figure of the stranger staring more blackly and blankly than ever with those unreasonably large blue glass eyes of his. He came down stiffly and slowly, staring all the time. He walked across the passage, staring, then stopped. "Look there," he said, and their eyes followed in the direction of the gloved finger and saw a bottle of sarsaparilla hard by the cellar door. Then he entered the parlor and swiftly, suddenly, viciously slammed the door in their faces. Not a word was spoken until the last echoes of the slam had died away. They stared at one another. "Well, if that don't lick everything," said Mr. Wadgers, and left the alternative unsaid. "I'd go in and ask about it," said Wadgers to Mr. Hall. "I'd demand an explanation." It took some time to bring the landlady's husband up to that pitch. At last he rapped, opened the door, and got as far as, "Excuse me." "Go to the devil," said the stranger in a tremendous voice, and "shut that door after you." So that brief interview terminated. Chapter 7. The Unveiling of the Stranger. The stranger went into the little parlor of the Coach and Horses about 5:30 in the morning, and he remained there until midday, the blinds down, the door shut, and none, after Hall's repulse, venturing near him. All that time he must have fasted. Thrice he rang his bell, and the third time furiously and continuously, but no one answered him. "Him and his go to the devil, indeed," said Mrs. Hall. Presently came an imperfect rumor of the burglary at the vicarage, and two were put together. Hall, assisted by Wadgers, went off to find Mr. Shuckleforth, the magistrate, and take his advice. No one ventured upstairs. How the stranger occupied himself is unknown. Now and then he would stride violently up and down, and twice came an outburst of curses, a tearing of paper, and a violent smashing of bottles. The little group of scared but curious people increased. Mrs. Huxler came over. Some gay and young fellows, resplendent in black, ready-made jackets and peak paper ties, for it was Whit Monday, joined the group with confused interrogations. Young Archie Harker distinguished himself by going up to the yard and trying to peep under the window blinds. He could see nothing, but gave reason for supposing that he did, and others of the Iping youth presently joined him. It was the finest of all possible Whit Mondays, and down the village street stood a row of nearly a dozen booths, a shooting gallery, and on the grass by the forge were 3 yellow and chocolate wagons, and some picturesque strangers of both sexes putting up a coconut shy. The gentlemen wore blue jeans, the ladies white aprons, and quite fashionable hats with heavy plumes. Wadger, of the Purple Fawn, and Mr. Jaggers, the cobbler, who also sold old second-hand bicycles, were stretching a string of Union Jacks and Royal Ensigns, which had originally celebrated the first Victorian Jubilee, across the road. And inside, in the artificial darkness of the parlor, into which only one thin jet of sunlight penetrated, the stranger, hungry, we must suppose, and fearful, hidden in his uncomfortable hot wrappings, poured through his dark glasses upon his paper and chinked his dirty little bottles, and occasionally swore savagely at the boys, audible if invisible, inside the windows. In the corner by the fireplace lay the fragments of 6 smashed bottles, and a pungent twang of chlorine tainted the air. So much we know from what was heard at the time, and from what was subsequently seen in the room. About noon he opened his parlor door and stood glaring fixedly at 3 or 4 people at the bar. "Mrs. Hall," he said. Somebody went sheepishly and called for Mrs. Hall. Mrs. Hall appeared after an interval, a little short of breath, but all the fiercer for that. Hall was still out. She had deliberated over this scene, and she came holding a little tray with an unsettled bill upon it. "Is it your bill you're wanting, sir?" she said. "Why wasn't my breakfast laid? Why haven't you prepared my meals or answered my bell? Do you think I live without eating?" "Why isn't my bill paid?" said Mrs. Hall. "That's what I want to know. I told you 3 days ago I was awaiting a remittance. I told you 2 days ago I wasn't going to await no remittances. You can't grumble if your breakfast waits a bit, if my bill's been waiting for these 5 days, can you?" The stranger swore briefly but vividly. "Nar, nar," from the bar. "And I'd thank you kindly, sir, if you'd keep your swearing to yourself, sir," said Mrs. Hall. The stranger stood looking more like an angry diving helmet than ever. It was universally felt in the bar that Mrs. Hall had the better of him. His next words showed as much. "Look here, my good woman," he began. "Don't good woman me," said Mrs. Hall. "I've told you my remittance hasn't come." "Remittance indeed," said Miss Hall. "Still, I dare say in my pocket. You told me 3 days ago that you hadn't anything but a sovereign's worth of silver upon you. Well, I've found some more." "Hullo!" from the bar. "I wonder where you found it," said Mrs. Hall. That seemed to annoy the stranger very much. He stamped his foot. "What do you mean?" he said. "That I wonder where you found it," said Mrs. Hall. "And before I take any bills or get any breakfasts, or do any such thing whatsoever, you got to tell me 1 or 2 things I don't understand, and what nobody don't understand, and what everybody is anxious to understand. I want to know what you've been doing to my chair upstairs, and I want to know how 'tis your room was empty, but how you got in again. Them it stops in the house comes in by the doors. That's the rule of the house, and that you didn't do. What I want to know is how you did come in, and I want to know—" Suddenly the stranger raised his gloved hands, clenched, stamped his foot, and said "Stop!" with such extraordinary violence that he silenced her instantly. "You don't understand," he said, "who I am or what I am. I'll show you. By heaven, I'll show you." Then he put his open palm over his face and withdrew it. The center of the face became a black cavity. "Here," he said. He stepped forward and handed Mrs. Hall something which she, staring at his metamorphosed face, accepted automatically. Then, when she saw what it was, she screamed loudly, dropped it, and staggered back. The nose, it was the stranger's nose, pink and shining, rolled on the floor. Then he removed his spectacles, and everyone in the bar gasped. He took off his hat, and with a violent gesture tore at the whiskers and bandages. For a moment they resisted him. A flash of horrible anticipation passed through the bar. "Oh, my God!" said someone. Then off they came. It was worse than anything. Mrs. Hall, standing open-mouthed and horror-struck, shrieked at what she saw, and made for the door of the house. Everyone began to move. They were prepared for scars, disfigurements, tangible horrors, but nothing. The bandages and false hair flew across the passage into the bar, making a hobbledehoy jump to avoid them. Everyone tumbled on everyone else down the steps, for the man who stood there, shouting some incoherent explanation, was a solid gesticulating figure up to the coat collar of him, and then nothingness, no visible thing at all. People down the village heard shouts and shrieks, and looking up the street saw the coach and horses violently firing out its humanity. They saw Mrs. Hall fall down and Mr. Teddy Henfrey jump up to avoid tumbling over her, and then they heard the frightful screams of Milly, who, emerging suddenly from the kitchen at the noise of the tumult, had come upon the headless stranger from behind. These increased suddenly. Forthwith everyone all down the street, the sweetstuff seller, coconut-shy proprietor and his assistant, the swingman, little boys and girls, rustic dandies, smart wenches, smocked elders and aproned gypsies, began running towards the inn, and in a miraculously short space of time a crowd of perhaps 40 people, and rapidly increasing, swayed and hooted and inquired and exclaimed and suggested in front of Mrs. Hall's establishment. Everyone seemed eager to talk at once, and the result was babel. A small group supported Mrs. Hall, who was picked up in a state of collapse. There was a conference, and the incredible evidence of a vociferous eye-witness. "Oh, Bogey, what's he been doing then? Ain't hurt a girl, has he? Running in with a knife, I believe. No, I tell you, I don't mean no manner of speaking. I mean marm without a head. Nonsense. 'Tis some conjuring trick, fetched off his wrapping and dead." In its struggles to see through the open door, the crowd formed itself into a straggling wedge, and the more adventurous apex nearest the inn He stood for a moment. I heard the gal scream, and he turned. I saw more skirts whisk, and he went after her. Didn't take 10 seconds. Back he comes with a knife in his hand, and a loaf. Stood just as if he was staring, not a moment ago. Went in that there door. I tell you, he ain't got no head, at all. You just missed him." There was a disturbance behind, and the speaker stopped to step aside for a little procession that was marching very resolutely toward the house. First Mr. Hall, very red and determined. Then Mr. Bobby Jafers, the village constable, and then wary Mr. Wagers, had come now armed with a warrant. People shouted conflicting information at the recent circumstances. "Ed or no Ed," said Jaffers, "I got to restin', and restin' I will." Mr. Hall marched up the steps, marched straight to the door of the parlor and flung it open. "Constable," he said, "do your duty." Jaffers marched in, Hall next, Wagers last. They saw in the dim light the headless figure facing them, with a gnawed crust of bread in one gloved hand and a chunk of cheese in the other. "That's him," said Hall. "What the devil's this?" Came a tone of angry expostulation from above the collar of the figure. "You're a damned rum customer, mister," said Mr. Jafers. "But Ed or no Ed, the warrant says body, and duty's duty." "Keep off," said the figure, standing back. Abruptly he whipped down the bread and cheese, and Mr. Hall grasped the knife on the table in time to save it. Off came the stranger's left glove, and was slapped in Jafers' face. In another moment Jafers, cutting short some statement concerning a warrant, had gripped him by the handless wrist, and caught the invisible throat. He got a sound kick in the shin that made him shout, but he kept his grip. Hall sent the knife sliding along the table to Wagers, who acted as a goalkeeper for the offensive, so to speak, and then stepped forward as Jaffers and the stranger swayed and staggered towards him, clutching and hitting in. A chair stood in the way, and went aside with a crash as they came down together. "Get the feet," said Jaffers between his teeth. Mr. Hall, endeavoring to act on instructions, received a sounding kick in the ribs that disposed of him for a moment, and Mr. Wagers, seeing the decapitated stranger had rolled over and got the upper side of Jaffers, retreated towards the door, knife in hand, and so collided with Mr. Huckster and the Sidderbridge carter, coming to the rescue of law and order. At the same moment down came 3 or 4 bottles of the chiffonnier, and shot a web of pugnancy into the air of the room. "I'll surrender," cried the stranger, though he had Jaffers down, and in another moment he stood up panting, a strange figure, headless and handless, for he had pulled off his right glove now as well as his left. "It's no good," he said, as if sobbing for breath. It was the strangest thing in the world to hear that voice coming as if out of empty space, but the Sussex peasants are perhaps the most matter-of-fact people under the sun. Jaffers got up also and produced a pair of handcuffs. Then he stared. "I say," said Jaffers, brought up short by the dim realization of the incongruency of the whole business. "Darn it, can't use 'em as I can't see." The stranger ran his arm down his waistcoat, and, as if by miracle, the buttons to which his empty sleeve pointed became undone. Then he said something about his shin, and stooped down. He seemed to be fumbling with his socks and shoes. "Why," said Huckster suddenly, "that's not a man at all. It's just empty clothes. Look, you can see down his collar and the linings of his clothes. I could put my arm—" He extended his hand. It seemed to meet something in mid-air, and he drew it back with a sharp exclamation. "I wish you'd keep your fingers out of my eye," said an aerial voice, in a tone of savage expostulation. "The fact is, I'm all here, head, hands, legs, and all the rest of it. But it happens I'm invisible. It's a confounded nuisance, but I am. That's no reason why I should be poked to pieces by every stupid bumpkin and iping, is it?" The suit of clothes, now all unbuttoned and hanging loosely upon its unseen supports, stood up, arms akimbo. Several other of the menfolks had now entered the room, so that it was now closely crowded. "Invisible, eh?" said Huckster, ignoring the stranger's abuse. "Who ever heard of the likes of that? It's strange, perhaps, but it's not a crime. Why am I assaulted by a policeman in this fashion?" "Ah, that's a different matter," said Jaffers. "But no doubt you're a bit difficult to see in this light. But I got a warrant, and it's all correct. What I'm after ain't no invisibility, but it's burglary. There's a house been broke into and money took." "Well?" "And circumstances certainly point." "Stuff and nonsense," said the invisible man. "I hope so, sir, but I've got my instructions." "Well," said the stranger, I'll come, but no handcuffs." "It's the regular thing," said Jaffers. "No handcuffs," stipulated the stranger. "Pardon me," said Jaffers. Abruptly, the figure sat down, and before anyone could realize what was being done, the slippers, socks, and trousers had been kicked off under the table. Then he sprang up again and flung off his coat. "Here, stop that," said Jaffers, suddenly realizing what was happening. He gripped at the waistcoat. It struggled, and the shirt slipped out of it and left it limp and empty in his hand. "Hold him," said Jaffers loudly. "Once he gets the things off, hold him," cried everyone. And there was a sudden rush at the fluttering white shirt, which was now all that was visible of the stranger. The shirt sleeve planted a shrewd blow in Hall's face that stopped his open-armed advance, and sent him backwards into the sexton, and in another moment the garment was lifted up and became convulsed and vacantly flapped about the arms, even as a shirt that is being thrusted over a man's head. Jaffers clutched at it, and only helped to pull it off. He was struck in the mouth out of the air, and incontinently threw his truncheon and smote Teddy Henfrey savagely upon the crown of his head. "Look out," said everybody, fencing at random and hitting at nothing. "Hold him, shut the door, don't let him loose. I got something, here he is." A perfect babel of noises they made. Everybody, it seemed, was being hit all at once, and Sandy Wadgers, knowing as ever and his wits sharpened by a frightful blow in the nose, reopened the door and led the rout. The others, following incontinently, were jammed for a moment in the corner by the doorway. The hitting continued. Phipps, the Unitarian, had a front tooth broken, and Henfrey was injured in the cartilage of his ear. Jaffers was struck under the jaw, and, turning, caught at something that intervened between him and Huckster in the melee, and prevented their coming together. He felt a muscular chest, and in another moment a whole mass of struggling, excited men shot out into the crowded hall. "I got him!" shouted Jaffers, choking and reeling through them all, and wrestling with purple face and swelling veins against his unseen enemy. Men staggered right and left as the extraordinary conflict swayed swiftly towards the house door, and went spinning down a half-dozen steps around the inn. Jaffers cried in a muffled voice, holding tight nevertheless, and making play with his knee, spun around, and fell heavily undermost with his head on the gravel. Only then did his fingers relax. There were excited cries of "Hold him! Invisible!" and so forth, and a young fellow, a stranger in the place, whose name did not come to light, rushed in at once, caught something, missed his hold, and fell over on the constable's prostrate body. Halfway across the road a woman screamed as something pushed by her a dog, kicked apparently, yelped and ran howling into Huckster's yard, and with that the transit of the invisible man was accomplished. For a space people stood amazed and gesticulating, and then came panic, and scattered them abroad through the village as a gust scatters dead leaves. But Jaffers lay quite still, his face upward and knees bent, at the foot of the steps of the inn. Chapter 8. In Transit. The 8th chapter is exceedingly brief, and relates that Gibbons, an amateur naturalist of the district, while lying out on the spacious open downs within a couple of miles of him, as he thought, and almost dozing, heard, close to him, the sound of a man coughing, sneezing, and then swearing savagely to himself, and looking, beheld nothing. Yet the voice was indisputable. It continued to swear with that breadth and variety that distinguishes the swearing of a cultivated man. It grew to a climax, diminished again, and died away in the distance, going, as it seemed to him, in the direction of Aberdeen. It lifted to a spasmodic sneeze at the end. Gibbons had heard nothing of the morning's occurrences, but the phenomenon was so striking and disturbing that his philosophical tranquillity vanished. He got up hastily, and hurried down the steepness of the hill toward the village, as fast as he could go. Chapter 9. Mr. Thomas Marvel. You must picture Mr. Thomas Marvel as a person of copious, flexible visage, a nose of cylindrical protrusion, a liquorish, ample, fluctuating mouth, and a beard of bristling eccentricity. His figure inclined to embonpoint. His short limbs accentuated his inclination. He wore a furry silk hat, and a frequent substitution of twine and shoelaces for buttons, apparent at critical points of his costume. A marked man, essentially bachelor, Mr. Thomas Marvel was sitting with his feet in a ditch by the roadside over the down towards Aberdeen, about a mile and a half out of Iping. His feet, save for socks of irregular open work, were bare, his big toes were broad, and pricked like ears of a watchful dog. In a leisurely manner, he did everything in a leisurely manner, he was contemplating trying on a pair of boots. They were the soundest boots he had ever come across for a long time, but too large for him, whereas the ones he had were, in dry weather, a very comfortable fit, but too thin-soled for damp. Mr. Thomas Marvel hated roomy shoes, but then he hated damp. He had never properly thought out which he hated most, and it was pleasantly dry, and there was nothing better to do. So he put the 4 shoes in a graceful group on the turf and looked at them, and seeing them there among the grass and the springing agrimony, it suddenly occurred to him that both pairs were exceedingly ugly to see. He was not at all startled by a voice behind him. "They're boots, anyhow," said the voice. "They are charity boots," said Mr. Thomas Marvel, with his head on one side regarding them distastefully. "And which is the ugliest pair in the whole blessed universe? I'm darned if I know." Said the voice. "I've worn worse, in fact. I've worn none, but none so audaciously ugly, if you'll allow the expression. I've been cadging boots, in particular, for days, because I was sick of them. The sound enough, of course, but a gentleman on tramp sees such a thundering lot of his boots, and if you'll believe me, I've raised nothing in the whole blessed country, try as I would, but them. Look at them. And a good country for boots, too, in a general way. But it's just my promiscuous luck. I've got my boots in this country 10 years or more, and then they treat you like this." "It's a beast of a country," said the voice, "and pigs for people." "Ain't it?" said Mr. Thomas Marvel. "Lord, but them boots, it beats it." He turned his head over his shoulder to the right, to look at the boots of his interlocutor, with a view of comparisons, and lo! Where the boots of his interlocutor should have been there were neither legs nor boots. He was irradiated by the dawn of great amazement. "Where are ye?" said Mr. Thomas Marvel, over his shoulder, and coming on all fours. He saw a stretch of empty downs and the wind swaying the remote green pointed furze bushes. "Am I drunk?" said Mr. Marvel. "Have I had visions? Was I talking to myself? What the—" "Don't be alarmed," said a voice. "None of your ventriloquizing me," said Mr. Thomas Marvel, rising sharply to his feet. "Where are ye? Alarmed, indeed." "Don't be alarmed," repeated the voice. "You'll be alarmed in a minute, you silly fool," said Mr. Marvel. "Where are ye? Let me get my mark on ye." "Are you buried?" said Mr. Marvel, after an interval. There was no answer. Mr. Marvel stood bootless and amazed, his jacket nearly thrown off. "Peewit," said a peewit, very remote. "Peewit, indeed," said Mr. Thomas Marvel. "This ain't no time for foolery." The down was desolate, east and west, north and south. The road, with its shallow ditches and white, bordering stakes, ran smooth and empty north and south, and, save for that peewit, the blue sky was empty too. "So help me," said Mr. Thomas Marvel, shuffling his coat onto his shoulders again. "It's the drink, I might have known." "It's not the drink," said the voice. "You keep your nerves steady." "Ow!" said Mr. Marvel, and his face grew white amidst the patches. "It's the drink," his lips repeated noiselessly. He remained staring about him, rotating slowly backwards. "I could have swore I heard a voice," he whispered. "Of course you did." "It's there again," said Mr. Marvel, closing his eyes and clasping his hand on his brow with a tragic gesture. He was suddenly taken by the collar and shaken violently, and left more dazed than ever. "Don't be a fool," said the voice. "I'm off my bloomin' chump," said Mr. Marvel. "It's no good. It's frettin' about them blarsted boots. I'm off my blessed bloomin' chump, or it's spirits." "Neither one thing nor the other," said the voice. "Listen." "Chump," said Mr. Marvel. "1 minute," said the voice, penetratingly, tremulous with self-control. "Well," said Mr. Marvel, with a strange feeling of having been dug in the chest by a finger. "You think I'm just imagination? Just imagination? What else can you be?" said Mr. Thomas Marvel, rubbing the back of his neck. "Very well," said the voice, in a tone of relief. "Then I'm going to throw flints at you till you think differently." "But where are ye?" The voice made no answer. Whizzed came a flint apparently out of the air, and missed Mr. Marvel's shoulder by a breadth's hair. Mr. Marvel, turning, saw a flint jerk up into the air, trace a complicated path, hang for a moment, and then fling at his feet with almost invisible rapidity. He was too amazed to dodge. Whiz it came, and ricocheted from a bare toe into the ditch. Mr. Thomas Marvel jumped a foot and howled aloud. Then he started to run, tripped over an unseen obstacle, and came head over heels into a sitting position. "Now," said the voice, as a third stone curved upward and hung in the air above the tramp, "and my imagination." Mr. Marvel, by way of reply, struggled to his feet, and was immediately rolled over again. He lay quiet for a moment. "If you struggle any more," said the voice, "I shall throw the flint at your head." "It's a fair do," said Mr. Thomas Marvel, sitting up, taking his wounded toe in hand and fixing his eye on the third missile. "I don't understand. Stones flinging themselves, stones talking. Put yourself down, rot away, I'm done." The third flint fell. "It's very simple," said the voice. I'm an invisible man." "Tell us something I don't know," said Mr. Marvel, gasping with pain. "Where you've hid, how you do it. I don't know. I'm beat." "That's all," said the voice. "I'm invisible. That's what I want you to understand. Anyone could see that. There's no need for you to be so confounded impatient, mister. Now then, give us a notion. How are you hid? I'm invisible. That's the great point. And what I want you to understand is this." "But whereabouts?" interrupted Mr. Marvel. "Here, 6 yards in front of you." "Oh, come, I ain't blind. You'll be telling me next you're just thin air. I'm not one of your ignorant tramps." "Yes, I am thin air. You're looking through me." "What? Ain't there no stuff to you? Voxet, what is it? Jabber, isn't that? I'm just a human being, solid, needing food and drink, needing covering too. But I'm invisible, you see. Invisible, simple idea, invisible." "What, real-like?" "Yes, real." "Let's have a hand of you," said Marvel. "If you are real, it won't be so darn out of the way, like, then, Lord," he said, "how you made me jump, gripping me like that." He felt the hand that had closed around his wrist with his disengaged fingers, and his fingers went timorously up the arm, patted a muscular chest, and explored a bearded face. Marvel's face was astonishment. "I'm dashed," he said, "if this don't beat cockfighting. Most remarkable. And there I can see a rabbit clean through you, half a mile away. But not a bit of you visible, except—" He scrutinized the apparently empty space cleanly. "You haven't been eating bread and cheese?" he asked, holding the invisible arm. "You're quite right, and it's not quite assimilated into the system." "Ah," said Mr. Marvel. "Sort of ghostly, though. Of course. All this isn't half so wonderful as you think." "It's quite wonderful enough for my modest wants," said Mr. Thomas Marvel. "How'd you manage it? How the deuce is it done?" "It's too long a story, and besides—" "I tell you, the whole business fairly beats me," said Mr. Marvel. "What I want to say at present is this. I need help. I have come to that. I came upon you suddenly. I was wandering, mad with rage, naked and impotent. I could have murdered, and I saw you." "Lord," said Mr. Marvel. "I came up behind you, hesitated, went on." Mr. Marvel's expression was eloquent. Then stopped. "Here," I said, "is an outcast like myself. This is the man for me. So I turned back and came to you, and—" "Lord," said Mr. Marvel. "But I'm all in a tizzy. May I ask, how is it, and what you may be requiring in the way of help? Invisible. I want you to help me get clothes and shelter, and then, with other things, I've left them long enough. If you won't, well, but you will, must." "Look here," said Mr. Marvel. "I'm too flabbergasted. Don't knock me about any more. And leave me go. I must get steady a bit. And you've pretty near broken my toe. It's all so unreasonable. Empty downs, empty sky, nothing visible for miles except the bosom of nature. And then comes a voice out of heaven, and stones, and a fist. Lord!" "Pull yourself together," said the voice, "for you've a job to do I've chosen for you." Mr. Marvel blew out his cheeks, and his eyes were round. "I've chosen you," said the voice. "You are the only man, except some of those fools down there, who knows there is such a thing as an invisible man. You have to be my helper. Help me, and I will do great things for you. An invisible man is a man of power." He stopped for a moment to sneeze violently. "If you betray me," he said, "if you fail to do as I direct you—" He paused and tapped Mr. Marvel's shoulders smartly. Mr. Marvel gave a yelp of terror at the touch. "I don't want to betray you," said Mr. Marvel, edging away from the direction of the fingers. "Don't you go thinking that, whatever you do. All I want to do is help you. Just tell me what I got to do. Lord. Whatever you want done, that I'm most willing to do." Chapter 10. Mr. Marvel's Visit to Iping. After the first gusty panic had spent itself, Iping became argumentative. Skepticism suddenly reared its head. Rather nervous skepticism, not at all assured of its back, but skepticism nevertheless. It is so much easier not to believe an invisible man, and those who had actually seen him dissolve into air, or felt the strength of his arm, could be counted on the fingers of 2 hands. And all these witnesses, Mr. Wadgers was presently missing, having retired impregnably behind the bolts and bars of his own house, and Jaffers was lying stunned in the parlor of the Coach and Horses. Great and strange ideas transcending experience often have less effect upon men and women than smaller, more tangible considerations. Iping was gay with bunting, and everyone was in gala dress. Whit Monday had been looked forward to for a month or more. By the afternoon, even those who believed in the unseen were beginning to resume their little amusements in a tentative fashion, on the supposition that he had quite gone away. and with the skeptics he was already a jest. But people, skeptics and believers alike, were remarkably sociable all that day. Hazeman's Meadow was gay with a tent, in which Mr. Bunting and other ladies were preparing tea, while, without, the Sunday school children ran races and played games under the noisy guidance of the curate and the Misses Cuss and Sackbut. No doubt there was slight uneasiness in the air, but people for the most part had a sense to conceal whatever imaginative qualms they experienced. On the village green, an inclined, strong rope, down which, clinging the while to the pulley swung handle, one could be hurled violently against the sack at the other end, came in for considerable favor among the adolescents, as also did the swings and coconut shies. There was also promenading, and the steam organ attached to the small roundabout filled the air with a repugnant flavor of oil with equally pungent music. Members of the club who had attended church in the morning were splendid in badges of pink and green, and some of the gayer-minded had also adorned their bowler hats with brilliant-colored favors of ribbon. Old Fletcher, whose conceptions of holiday-making were severe, was visible throughout the jasmine in his window and through the open door, whichever way you chose to look, poised delicately on a plank supported on 2 chairs and whitewashing the ceiling of his front room. About 4 o'clock a stranger entered the village from the direction of the downs. He was a short, stout person in an extraordinarily shabby top-hat, and he appeared to be very much out of breath. His cheeks were alternately limp and tightly puffed. His mottled face was apprehensive, and he moved with a sort of reluctant alacrity. He turned the corner of the church, and directed his way to the coach and horses. Among others, old Fletcher remembers seeing him, and indeed the old gentleman was so struck by his peculiar agitation that he inadvertently allowed a quantity of whitewash to run down the brush into the sleeve of his coat while regarding him. The stranger, to the perceptions of the proprietor of the coconut shy, appeared to be talking to himself, and Mr. Huckster remarked the same thing. He stopped at the foot of the coach and horses' steps, and, according to Mr. Huckster, appeared to undergo a severe internal struggle before he could induce himself to enter the house. Finally, he marched up the steps and was seen by Mr. Huckster to turn the left and open the door of the parlor. Mr. Huckster heard voices from within the room, and the bar appraising the man of his error. "That room's private," said Hall, and the stranger shut the door clumsily and went into the bar. In the course of a few minutes he reappeared, wiping his lips with the back of his hand, with an air of quiet satisfaction that somehow impressed Mr. Huckster as assumed. He stood looking for him for some moments, and then Mr. Huckster saw him walking in an oddly furtive manner towards the gates of the yard, upon which the parlor window opened. The stranger, after some hesitation, leant into one of the gate-posts, produced a short clay pipe, and prepared to fill it. His fingers trembled while doing so. He lit it clumsily, and folding his arms began to smoke in a languid attitude, an attitude which his occasional glances up the yard altogether belied. All this Mr. Huckster saw of the canisters of the tobacco window, and the singularity of the man's behavior prompted him to maintain his observation. Presently the stranger stood up abruptly, and put out his pipe in his pocket. Then he vanished into the yard. Forthwith Mr. Huckster, conceiving he was witness to some petty larceny, leapt round his counter and ran out into the road to intercept the thief. And he did so. Mr. Marvel reappeared, his hat askew, a big bundle in blue tablecloth in one hand, and 3 books tied together, as it proved afterwards with the vicar's braces, in the other. Directly he saw Huckster, he gave a sort of gasp, and turning sharply to the left, began to run. "Stop, thief!" cried Huckster, and set off after him. Mr. Huckster's sensations were vivid but brief. He saw the man just before him, and spurting briskly for the church corner and the hilltop. He saw the village flags and festivities beyond, and a face or so turned toward him. He bawled, "Stop!" again. He had hardly gone 10 strides before his shin was caught in some mysterious fashion, and he was no longer running, but flying with inconceivable rapidity through the air. He saw the ground suddenly close to his face. The world seemed to splash into a million whirling specks of light. The subsequent proceedings interested him no more.